I'm very excited to be kicking off a brand new series for this channel, California as a Pokemon Region. In this multi-part series of videos, I'm going to be taking a look at the golden state of California. I'll be taking into account its natural geography, cities, culture, flora, fauna, and history to see how my home state would be represented in the Pokemon world. Seeing as how California makes up over 12% of the US population and is the most biodiverse section of the United States by far, it was the perfect candidate to transform into a region, and we have plenty to work with. Of course, I won't be able to touch on everything that this vast state has to offer and what it would look like in Pokemon, but in this first video, I'm going to be running through the map I've created of this fictional region and discuss what your journey through it would roughly look like, the Pokemon you'd encounter, and the cities you'd see on your way. To give just a brief overview, our journey will take place in a vast land that stretches from a volcanic and rugged eastern half to a vast ocean on the western coastline, with sprawling cities, portside towns, rich farmland, lush forests, and hot deserts in between. This wide mix might seem like an exaggeration, but believe it or not, it's overall pretty faithful to California's selection of natural landscapes. Of course, a few areas are exaggerated and the distance between major landmarks isn't 100% accurate, but I designed this primarily as a Pokemon region, with a good balance that would work to give you the best experience if this were to appear in a hypothetical game. So with enough introduction, let's head to our first town. In the north-central section of the region, there's a little town in the foothills of icy mountain ranges that would be the player's hometown. This town is most emblematic of the origins of the Golden State, modeled after towns like Placerville, Auburn, Old Town Sacramento, and Sutter's Creek. In real life, this was the first part of California settled by Westerners, who came looking for gold in the region's luscious rivers at the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. This sparked the gold rush of 1849, and as such, our starting town would reflect this history well. Like any Pokemon starting town, it has a small woodland and countryside vibe to it, with a temperate climate that doesn't get too hot or too cold, and with small houses that have the brick architecture of these old California towns. It's surrounded on the east by foothills that lead up to the region's largest lake, complete with a few creeks and rivers where early settlers panned for rare minerals. And to the west, we get the river that leads down south, meant for fertile soil for farming. Here, the residents love old traditions and they live a more rustic lifestyle than most of the other settlements of the region. A good variety of Pokemon can be found here, that are both part of the natural ecosystem and imported to tend to the fertile foothill soil, along with mining gold and chopping wood. After leaving the starting town, you would find yourself in an open area full of gentle rolling hills, not unlike Roseville's minor ravine in real life. One interesting thing to note about the landscape here is that it marks the border between the farmland and the dense forest to the north, separated by a big river between the two. This separation is true of California, where Sacramento and Gold Country is on the border between the Central Valley to the south and the volcanic forests that border Oregon to the north. So once we cross a wooden bridge, modeled after Yuba County's historic Bridgeport Bridge, we find ourselves on the opposite side of Route 1, and it's a lot more forested than what we're used to. Here, we'd end up in a town somewhat modeled after Susanville and Westwood, which is the reported home of Paul Bunyan, an old folk hero passed around by settlers and loggers. So this town would be pretty small. It would mainly be a hub for traders and explorers who venture around the northern mountains of the region, inspired by Lassen County. The soil here is reddish-brown with some forest coverage, and there's year-round ashfall, similar to Fallover Town and Lava Ridge towns in Hoenn. So it's very hard for farmland to thrive here, which is why the town is such a popular trading post, since the residents rely on imported goods to survive this harsh climate. Here, you'd also find an old shrine, inspired by the Bak Kai Temple in Marysville, which is where Chinese immigrants who came to mine gold had a place to worship their old traditions in real life. In this region, the shrine would be represented through a Johto-themed shrine, where it's explained that the settlers of this region came from the Johto region to find fortune elsewhere, similar to California's real-life origin. Because of this, there are going to be a lot of Johto Pokemon who call this region home, and even some regional forms as Pokemon adapted to the region's environment. But we'll get to that in the next video. This little town would also be at the base of the very tall volcano next to it, where you could hike up to the foothills and explore the summit of the lava-filled mountain and the source of the year-round ashfall, as well as catch some fire and rock-type Pokemon before continuing onwards. Once you leave this town, you'd find that the trees slowly regain life and the ashfall would end, instead leaving you with towering evergreen trees, taller than any other in the Pokemon world, and you'd be on a winding road through a dense forest. This is inspired by a few areas, all of which are located in Northern California and have one thing in common. They're home to the coastal redwoods, which are the only remaining natural habitats for this gigantic species of tree. In our region, you'd venture through these winding woods, seeing all sorts of plant, deer, and rodent Pokemon who thrive in the lush forest, as well as dark fairy and even some ghost types who come out at night, drawn to the forest because of its mythical qualities. This would be important to note, because the Native American tribes who lived in the real redwoods for hundreds of years also thought these trees were mythical, and this region should definitely honor Native American culture, since that's also a huge part of California's history. There would also be a very small town in the middle of this forest. This town would mainly be like a visitor center at a national park instead of a real town, where buildings are modest log cabins and are meant to blend into the nature seamlessly, like Fortree City and Hoenn. They accommodate plenty of tourists who come from all over the Pokemon world to sightsee in the woods. I think this would be a fitting place for a grass-type gym also, with a park ranger gym leader. After you make your way out of the winding redwoods, you'd end up nearly on the western coastline for the first time. But the beaches here aren't what you'd expect. Just like southern Oregon and northern California in real life, these beaches are home to massive sand dunes, sharp cliffs, crashing waves, strong winds, and a lot of fog. Point being, it's pretty miserable out here. It's a really rugged environment, meant for only the toughest water-type Pokemon that can be found on the side of these cliffs, inspired by the habitat of California gulls, California gray whales, and Dungeness crabs. This stretch would also be inspired by the real-life Lost Coast Trail, which is the longest uninterrupted beach wilderness trail in the whole US. Once you reach the end of the trail, you'd be in a medium-sized town, full of old-fashioned stone piers and old architecture. This would be like real-life Eureka, which is a major commercial fishing port in Northern California, also home to a bunch of Victorian buildings built by 19th century fishermen who developed this land, such as the Carson Mansion. This town would be home to many fishermen and divers who look for rare Pokemon off the coasts, and wealthy older residents who live in the Old Town district. Just like the other three towns in the northern part of this region, this town would be very old-fashioned and embracing its history well, honoring older traditions instead of modernizing, which is a big theme to keep in mind as we venture forward. South of this town, we could also find a wooden military fort that you could visit, inspired by Fort Ross. At one point in real life, this was a Russian outpost, meant for soldiers to hang out and take advantage of Northern California's resources in both lumber and fur, providing help to Russia's colonies in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. But thanks to overhunting, the colony failed to be too productive by 1840, so Russia sold it to a gold businessman. So I think it would be cool for this region's version of the fort to be Fort Sinnoh, an outpost established by settlers from the Sinnoh region, who tried to colonize this place at the same time as settlers from Johto, choosing this particular spot because of the cold weather and rocky shores which reminded them of their home region's climate. But just like the real-life Russians, they were unsuccessful, so this is their only remaining structure. After Fort Sinnoh, the landscape becomes a lot less harsh, and the rugged cliffs are replaced by the standard grassland that you see in pretty much every region, as well as gentle rolling hills with small woods and a few rivers and streams along the way. But mostly, this land is full of orchards and vineyards, inspired by California's wine country. This is a region in Napa and Sonoma counties known for being the home of almost 800 different wineries. This is because of the warm weather, called a Mediterranean climate, so it doesn't get too hot or too cold, and it's perfect for growing grapes. Along this route, you'd find various mansions, almost like castles, where wealthy individuals grow something like apricorns or another consumable item in Pokemon, giving them their fortune. You'd also find a nice town inspired by Sonoma, full of boutiques, hotels, and fancy restaurants, again very popular with tourists. This elegant part of the region would be called Little Kalos, for its similarities to a certain French-inspired region. You'd also be able to find domestic-style Pokemon to catch, plus rare ones from other regions who have escaped from various mansions and now roam the vineyards and hills freely. Once you leave this area, you'd find yourself crossing a few more hills before standing in front of a certain red bridge, inspired by none other than the Golden Gate Bridge. This mile-long bridge was built in 1937, and is considered a masterpiece of civil engineering, as well as arguably one of the most iconic sites in the whole US, much less California. So the gateway to the central part of this region would be a similar one to the real Golden Gate Bridge, but perhaps more golden shade to pay homage to the Golden State nickname, and it could be explained that it's the inspiration for Kanto's Nugget Bridge thanks to its golden hue. As you cross the bridge, you could look across a vast bay full of ships of all sizes and marine Pokemon, before being struck by city lights. You'd end up in a huge town inspired by San Francisco, one of the biggest towns in the Pokemon world and the central aspect of this region. In real life, San Francisco is way too complex for me to sum up in this video, but in short, it was a port town in the 19th century, home to Italian, Chinese, and pioneer immigrants, before burning down in 1906 due to a great fire. Then was rebuilt, and it has a rich history of cuisine, art, sports, technology, and politics. So the Pokemon version of this town could be like a port city not unlike Unova's Castelia City, where it's a hub of both finance and culture. This town would be bustling with things to do and explore, like ride cable cars up and down the massive hills and engage in battles on them, like the battle subway system, and each pier would have a different activity to do and quest to fulfill. I also think there could be a cool tunnel system like Santoh's underground mines, or Castelia City's sewer system. This would reference the Twin Peaks Tunnel, which is a tunnel used for trains and was dug into San Francisco's Twin Peaks Mountain in the late 1800s. In terms of geography, I think the town could actually be an island, which San Francisco obviously isn't in real life. But in this version, it would be cool if ports were on every side, and if each corner of the city had different architectural styles, just like San Francisco's many districts in real life. With a circular park in the middle like Golden Gate Park, where you could catch many rare Pokémon. I also think this version of San Francisco could have many flower beds and gardens, to reference hippie and psychedelic culture, and the 1967 Summer of Love, and the cultural activities here would be inspired by San Francisco's strong ties to art and culture throughout its history. So while this region San Francisco would be an island, it would be connected on 3 sides. We came from the north, on the Golden Gate Bridge, but to the east there would be another bridge, and to the south a water route would connect our journey south. But first let's take a small detour east. We could cross a silver bridge inspired by the Bay Bridge, ending up in a modern port town, full of industrial machinery and ships. This would be like Oakland, which is almost a sister city to San Francisco, and it's known for its massive shipping lanes at the Port of Oakland, an international hub of trade. This town wouldn't be as touristy as its counterpart, but we could explore functional shipyards just like Univa's Driftvale City, before venturing further into town, where there would be a very modern downtown full of tech offices, meant to reference San Jose and Silicon Valley, where a lot of real-life companies like Google, Apple, and Facebook were founded and are there to this day. This could be something like Silphco and Kanto, where the primary technology of this region is developed, and maybe the villainous team could be behind that. All in all, this industrial and technological town would be a good contrast to what we've seen before, and would reinforce the theme of tradition versus progress. To the north of this town, there would just be a little small route, and it would just be a section along a swampy riverbed, not unlike the Sacramento Delta, San Joaquin River, or Alviso wetlands. These are all areas where the salty ocean water mixes with fresh water, creating unique landscapes full of marshes. This would be a good side area where you could find a mix of ground and water type Pokémon, and explore abandoned wreckage left on various tiny mud islands all over the delta. Let's head back to the southern part of San Francisco, where you could head south on a water route, surfing through rocky and rough waters to get to a peninsula that constitutes a long stretch of land in the central part of the region. This area would be somewhat rocky and rugged, full of beaches and lighthouses, as well as small seaside cabins in the tall dunes and the fog. Not quite as harsh as what we saw up near Fort Sinnoh, though. This landscape would have rolling beaches and coastal vegetation, perfect for a wide variety of water-type Pokémon. This would be inspired by Pacifica, Half Moon Bay, and mainly Santa Cruz. These are all small seaside communities in Central California. And I think there would be a cool seaside town here, a summer getaway of sorts for the residents of the bigger cities, and it could have some sort of amusement park, the same way real-life Santa Cruz has the beach boardwalk. As we go further south, the fog eventually eases up entirely, and the beaches become a lot more pristine and less rocky, and we find a modern seaside town similar to Monterey in real life. This town would have a rich nautical history, but has since modernized to include a museum, a university, and several research institutions all devoted to marine life. So I'm guessing it would be somewhat like Slateport City from Hoenn. This is inspired by Monterey's Bay Aquarium, which is a really popular aquarium that also does a ton of great conservation and rehabilitation of marine life. So I think this would be an excellent place for a water-type gym that would be set in the Marine Institute here. And you could also explore a beautiful underwater tunnel, similar to the Marine Tube, where you could see all sorts of water-type Pokémon up close before catching them. Once you leave the town, you'd be faced with a massive white bridge that spans across a giant ravine. This would be based on the Bixby Bridge, which is an iconic feature of Highway 1, California's coastal highway for sightseeing. After crossing the bridge, you'd end up in another dense forest, full of trees a bit like what we saw up north, although this time they would get a lot more rain and be more tropical in nature, providing a humid rainforest with an extreme amount of biodiversity. This is somewhat like California's Big Sur region, a massive undeveloped stretch of land along Highway 1 encompassing over half of the distance between Santa Cruz and LA. So it's pretty big, and it's not actually tropical in real life because California isn't really tropical, but I think for the Pokemon version, it would be fun to exaggerate just a little bit, and you'd be able to find both rare Pokemon in the woods and along the white sand beaches here. You'd venture through this dense wilderness before ending up on the other side. Once out of the jungle, you'd be at the foothills of a great mountain, inspired by the Los Padres mountain range, and you could go either south or north. To the north, there would be a small town similar to Fresno, Bakersfield, or any number of small farming or ranching towns in California's Central Valley. A massive flat grassland that's caught between Big Sur and the eastern Sierra mountain range, so it's the perfect place for growing crops. You'd venture through this massive area and you'd find a bunch of farm-like Pokémon to catch, and you could also explore a massive ranch inspired by Tejon Ranch, a massive crop cattle farm, which is the largest privately owned land in the whole state, along with a beautiful flower reserve in the grasslands inspired by the Antelope Valley's wildflower blooms that occur during the springtime. I think it would be cool to have a ground-type gym in this agricultural area, with most of the residents having a farmer, rancher, or even modern cowboy theme. Let's head back south to the mountain range, where we'd head down south on the slopes and find a pleasant valley with a massive castle, to reference Hearst Castle in real life, built by William Randolph Hearst. The extravagance of this castle would fit in well with the southern part of this region, more focused on wealth and fashion than the traditional northern half that we saw. After visiting the castle, you could head down some hills only to find that you were overlooking a sprawling metropolis, inspired by none other than Los Angeles. Of course, everyone knows about LA's history as a Mexican colony that boomed in population after the discovery of oil, then became a sprawling center of American post-war culture, and of course, the celebrity lifestyle and entertainment hub that we call Hollywood. LA is like San Francisco because I could hardly do it justice all by myself in this video. But roughly, I envision the Pokemon version of this town to be full of different districts, all vastly different from one another. We could have a suburban area that's very much like classic 1950s Americana, full of car culture and drive-in diners. Then we could have a research area with an observatory, modeled after NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, and a paleontology center modeled after the La Brea tar pits, which would be a cool way to include fossil Pokemon. Of course, we'd have something akin to Pokestar Studios, to pay homage to the various movie studios around Hollywood and Universal City. I also think that Galar's gym system in giant stadiums is pretty awesome, and though I have different ideas for the various gyms around this region, I do think that at least one battle, either the final gym or the Pokemon League itself, should be in a giant stadium in this city, of course modeled after Pasadena's Rose Bowl, home to the annual college football matchup between the Big Ten and the Pac-12, arguably the biggest game of the year for that sport besides the Super Bowl. So having a Pokemon battle with over 90,000 spectators to pay homage to the Rose Bowl would be incredible. I think one final aspect of the city could be the piers, just like San Francisco's. One pier in particular would be the home of the Sharpedo cruise line, a service that would take you to the two islands off the coast of the region. The first island would be based on the Farallon Islands, which are off the coast of San Francisco, and are so foggy and so rocky it's actually dangerous for unlicensed ships to sail there. It's also home to a research base due to how many great white sharks breed there, to the point where the islands are known as part of the Red Triangle, which is a breeding ground in Northern California for many marine mammals, particularly sharks. Due to the mysterious and dangerous nature of the real Farallon Islands, I think this northern island should be dubbed Sharpedo Island, and could be explored using the Sharpedo ferry line. The southern island would be a popular tourist destination for residents of the southern part of the region. This place would be a comical contrast to its brother island, since it would be always sunny and the waters would always be clear. A good name for this would be Milotic Island, named for the island's gentle nature and a rare Pokemon that can be sighted there. This is inspired by the real-life resort of Catalina Island, a popular site for marine research and also recreational water sports for people from LA. There could be cool stuff on this island inspired by Catalina's Avalon Casino or its many restaurants and hotels. Heading back to the mainland now, you could briefly go south from LA to find a cool city inspired by San Diego, and most of Orange County, since it's full of canals, piers, and fancy houses, just like places like Venice Beach, Manhattan Beach, Long Beach, or Laguna Beach. There could also be a cool neighborhood inspired by San Diego's Balboa Park or San Diego Zoo, but otherwise I think this would be best as a side area. Heading back north to Los Angeles, you could then head east to a tunnel based on the Mojave lava tubes. Once you trek through the lava caves, you'd end up in a vast desert, one of the largest in the whole Pokemon world. This would be based on the Mojave Desert, which comprises a huge section of Southern California, all the way to the Sonoran Desert on the Arizona border. This harsh landscape is full of beautiful rock formations, yucca plants, cacti, and ocotillos, all of which make up the landscape of Joshua Tree National Park in particular. This also runs along the former Route 66, which was the primary route from the Midwest to Southern California back in the day. Because of this, there would be a good mix of exploration both in the vast wilderness of the desert and also sights to see on the paved highway that remains. There would also be a really nice town here, full of lush vegetation almost like an oasis in the vast desert. This extravagant town would be based on Palm Springs, which is a pretty high-class town mainly known for its golf, backyard pools, and senior citizens. Once you head north from this town, you'd end up in the second section of this desert that's even harsher than what we found before. In this section, based on Death Valley and the Great Basin, which is the lowest point in California, most of the trees couldn't even survive, and what remains of natural lake beds has completely dried up and turned into pure salt. This makes it nearly uninhabitable for anything but the toughest of Pokémon that live on the dry hills along the highway. And you could even see eerie sights based on things like Bombay Beach and Salvation Mountain. You'd also find cool acid-based lakes based on places like Mono Lake, which barely needs to be exaggerated, because they already look otherworldly in real life. The highway would eventually end and turn into old dirt roads that are remnants of the early settlers of this region. You'd come across a ghost town inspired by Bodhi, which was a boom town from the 19th century where gold was discovered in these dry hills. It eventually became a ghost town just like most other settlements in this part of California, so I think it would be cool if the Pokemon version had a strong resemblance to the player's starting town, and it could be explained that this was the original version of that town, but the Johto settlers had to move to a better climate before they died out from the heat. Here you could find ghost and fire-type Pokemon that haunt the abandoned wood structures. After this, the desert eventually ends and you end up in an area a lot more mountainous than anything we've seen before, resembling Ebbitt's Pass, or the countless steep cliffs that make up the Sierra Nevada mountain range. You'd cross these dangerous mountains, eventually finding yourself in an area based on none other than Yosemite National Park. This is a world-renowned icon of a park for its granite cliffs like Half Dome, sequoia trees, and countless endangered species who call the park home. In the Pokemon version, there would be a lot of bird, bear, and buffalo Pokemon that roam around freely, but this would be the most open area by far, home to countless powerful Pokemon in this beautiful region where you could explore riverbeds, cliffs, caves, and forests, almost like a mini region of its own. Once you've explored this area, it's time to move on to the final addition to this California region. The last area lies a bit north of Yosemite, but still in the mountain range, where you'd find one last town inspired by the resort communities of Lake Tahoe, known for the beautiful freshwater lake comprised of freshly melted ice, perfect for fishing, hiking, and in the winter, skiing. This town would probably have an ice-type gym, with a ski instructor gym leader that runs a gym in a converted winter sports resort. The area around it would also contain a wide assortment of ice types in the hills and the mountains, with plenty of water types in the vast lake, which is the region's largest lake by far, and it would loop right back around to your starting town on the other side of it. So there you have it. We've explored the entirety of California as a Pokemon region in terms of geography, covering everything from lush forests in the north, pristine beaches along the coast, searing hot deserts in the south, and of course, a wide mix of towns and cities that embrace old-school traditions, and have also boomed into cultural capitals of the Pokemon world. I feel like this region would have a ton of potential, so I hope that I've given you a good taste of what California would be like if you could explore it in a future Pokemon game. And I'll be sure to flesh out more details about this vast land in future videos. Starting in a few days, where I'll discuss a few regional forms that I've designed of older Pokemon that would inhabit this world well if they adapted to it. This series has been a product of a ton of hard work over the past few weeks, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed designing it. So I'll see you in a few days for more content.